Welcome to Exodus, A New Beginning, a journey that will take you to the edge of the universe where hope is the last thing humanity has left. Earth is dying, its resources exhausted, its cities in ruins. The Exodus, a massive ark-like ship, holds the last remnants of human civilization. But space is vast, and the dangers are beyond anything they've ever imagined. In this thrilling tale of survival, sacrifice, and discovery, every choice could be their last. Join the crew as they venture into the unknown, searching for a new home among the stars. Will they succeed in rebuilding, or will humanity become just another forgotten relic of the past? Stay tuned, because what you're about to witness isn't just a story, it's the future of the human race. Earth was dying, and no one knew how much longer it had. Once it had been a planet full of life, a world thriving with green forests, endless oceans, and blue skies. But now it was choking on its own demise. The air was thick with pollution, the seas had risen and swallowed entire coastlines, and what remained of the population was teetering on the brink of collapse. For years, humanity had ignored the warnings. They had fought wars over resources, turned a blind eye to the changing climate, and allowed greed to dictate their future. But in the final days, there was no denying the truth. Earth was dying, and with it, the last hope for humanity. In those dark hours, something unimaginable happened. A solution. It wasn't a cure, nor was it a miraculous technology that could heal the Earth. No, the answer was much more profound, and it came in the form of a spaceship, the Exodus. This colossal ark, built to carry the last remnants of humanity, would be their salvation. A vessel that could cross the stars in search of a new home, a new chance for survival. The Exodus wasn't just a ship, it was humanity's last breath, their final hope, a symbol of both desperation and resilience. But the journey it would undertake was not just across the galaxy. It was a journey to reclaim everything humanity had lost and to start again on an alien world, far from the scars of Earth. Captain Helena Core stood on the bridge of the Exodus, staring out at the dark void of space. Her face, bathed in the soft glow of the control panels, was a mask of calm determination. She had led soldiers in battle, navigated the intricacies of warfare, but nothing had prepared her for this. Nothing had prepared her to carry the weight of an entire species on her shoulders. "We're ready," she whispered to herself, barely above a murmur. Behind her, the Exodus's engines roared to life, its thrusters igniting with a power that sent tremors through the metal hull. The ship, the size of a small city, slowly began to ascend from the ravaged Earth, leaving behind the broken planet that had once been home to billions of souls. And as they soared into the heavens, leaving the remnants of Earth far behind, all Helena could do was hold on to the slim thread of hope that this mission would succeed. The stars seemed indifferent as the Exodus made its way into the unknown, but inside the ship, there were those who would fight, who would survive, and who would rebuild. There was still so much to be done, so much they had yet to discover. Among the crew, there was Dr. Felix Riker, the ship's chief scientist who had once studied the planet's ecosystems and how to restore them. Now he was tasked with ensuring that the Exodus itself remained a self-sustaining entity. From the recycled air to the food they would grow, everything had to work perfectly, or they would not survive the journey. Then there was Ava Sloan, a seasoned agricultural engineer who had spent her life working to solve food shortages on Earth. Now, she faced the incredible challenge of growing crops in a sterile, enclosed environment, relying on the limited resources they had on board. If she failed, the entire crew would starve. And of course, there was Kai Tanaka, a skilled pilot with years of experience navigating the stars. His job was to navigate the Exodus through the perils of space, avoiding radiation storms, asteroid fields, and black holes. In this vast empty galaxy, even the smallest mistake could cost them everything. The journey was perilous, and every step forward came with the knowledge that failure was not an option. But there was a part of them deep down that believed they could make it. They had to believe. After all, what was left if they didn't? Helena looked at her crew, each of them standing tall, their faces a mix of fear and determination. They were all that remained of Earth. Their success meant everything. "Everyone," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet hum of the ship's systems. "We are the last hope. No matter what happens, we're going to make it. Together." The words felt weighty in the air, like a promise they would all have to keep. As the Exodus moved further from the dying planet, they couldn't help but look back, not just at Earth, but at the legacy they carried with them. The memory of a world that had given them life, and now, a world they could never return to. Helena's gaze softened as she turned away from the window, setting her mind on what lay ahead. "Let's make sure it wasn't all in vain," she whispered. The stars stretched out before them, an endless sea of possibilities. And for the first time in a long while, the crew of the Exodus felt a flicker of hope. It was small, fragile, but it was there. They would find a new home, a new world to call their own. The Exodus was more than a ship. It was a lifeline. A city adrift in the vastness of space, carrying the last fragments of humanity in its hollowed-out belly. Inside, the hum of machinery was constant, a gentle reminder that they were all suspended in the quiet abyss of the universe, bound for an uncertain future. As the ship continued its journey through the infinite void, its crew began to settle into the rhythm of life aboard the Exodus. Every day was a test of endurance, a challenge to keep their humanity intact despite the desolation around them. They weren't just passengers on a ship, they were the architects of the future. Captain Helena Core stood on the observation deck, her hands resting lightly on the railing as she stared out into the deep expanse. It was hard to grasp that Earth was no longer their home. The distance between them and the planet they once called their own had become an almost abstract concept, something she could feel but never truly touch. The stars beyond, scattered like diamonds in the dark, were beautiful in a way that made her heart ache. Behind her, footsteps echoed across the smooth metal floor. She turned to see Dr. Felix Riker approaching. His gaze was focused as usual, his mind seemingly always miles ahead of everyone else, thinking about the ship's systems and how they would survive in the coming years. "Everything running smoothly?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. It wasn't that she doubted his expertise, she was just accustomed to the constant need for vigilance. "Only as well as it can," Felix replied, adjusting his glasses. He was a man who preferred facts to optimism, and in the face of so much uncertainty, it was hard to argue with his pragmatism. "We're still managing with the resources we have, but the life support systems are stretching thin. If we don't find a way to grow more food or recycle oxygen more efficiently, we'll start running into trouble in a few months." Helena nodded, her gaze returning to the stars. "We'll get there," she said softly, though her voice held a note of doubt she didn't want to admit. "Somehow, we will." Across the ship, in the food production area, Ava Sloan was knee-deep in work. The ship's hydroponics bays were cramped, and the artificial sunlight filtering through the thick glass dome above flickered erratically, a side effect of a malfunctioning power grid. But Ava didn't let these problems deter her. She had seen far worse in her career before, growing crops in Earth's most hostile environments, learning to adapt to every challenge the planet threw her way. This was no different, except it was bigger, more pressing, and she suspected, much more fragile. She crouched down to inspect the crops growing in rows of sterile, soilless beds. Some were thriving, others not so much. The carrots were weak, their leaves yellowing, the tomatoes weren't ripening. Ava bit her lip in frustration, knowing that these small, seemingly insignificant failures could spell disaster for the Exodus in the long run. "Are we really going to make it?" she whispered to herself, fingers brushing the leaves of a struggling plant. But she wasn't alone. A familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. "You'll fix it," Kai Tanaka said from the doorway, his arms crossed over his chest. His voice was calm, soothing, even in the midst of the uncertainty that surrounded them. Kai had always been the easygoing one, the one who brought humor and lightness to dark moments, and she needed that now more than ever. Ava let out a quiet sigh, standing up straight and wiping the dirt from her hands. "I hope you're right, Kai. If we don't get these systems under control, we won't survive the journey, let alone make it to the planet." Kai stepped into the room, his boots thudding softly on the metallic floor. He moved toward the console that controlled the irrigation systems, tapping a few buttons to bring up the data. "We'll make it," he repeated with a grin. "You've pulled off harder miracles than this. Besides, you've got the best team in the galaxy. We've got each other's backs." Ava smiled faintly, though she didn't quite believe the words. But she needed to. They all did. Without hope, there was nothing left. Later that evening, the crew gathered in the dining hall for the nightly briefing. The small space was abuzz with conversations, people seated at long metal tables, eating their rationed meals in silence. A few spoke in low tones, others huddled together, discussing the latest readings from the ship's sensors. But the air was thick with the unspoken weight of their collective uncertainty. Helena took the front of the room, her eyes scanning the faces of the men and women who had become her new family. It was a strange thought. Family. They had been thrown together out of necessity, and yet, in some ways, they had become closer than any family she had ever known. They were all that was left of Earth, and that bond was stronger than any bloodline. Everyone, she began, her voice steady. We are entering the 4th month of our journey. We're making progress, but we can't afford to become complacent. We need to focus on maintaining the systems, staying vigilant, and continuing to work together. Our survival depends on each and every one of us. A murmur of agreement passed through the room, though it was clear that the crew, despite their determination, was beginning to feel the toll of the journey. We're going to make it, Helena said again, this time more for herself than for anyone else. We just have to hold on, keep moving forward. As the meeting came to a close and the crew filed out of the room, Helena stayed behind. She looked out of the window again, her thoughts swirling like the stars outside. She was the captain. She had to lead them, protect them, keep them moving forward. But the weight of that responsibility was almost too much to bear. Felix, Ava, Kai, her crew, had their own roles to play. But it was she who had to make the impossible choices. She wasn't sure she could do it alone. Hold on, she whispered into the darkened room, the words directed more toward herself than anyone else. Just a little longer. And with that, she turned away from the view of the stars, knowing that the hardest part of their journey was still ahead. The Exodus drifted through the inky vastness of space like a fragile speck, its metallic body a mere whisper among the stars. It was quiet, too quiet. Only the hum of the ship's life support systems and the soft whir of machinery filled the silence, a constant reminder that they were still alive. But for how long? Captain Helena Kor paced the command deck, her boots clicking softly against the polished floor. She looked out at the endless stretch of space before her, the twinkling stars offering no comfort. It was hard to feel small when the universe itself felt so empty, so cold. Behind her, Kai Tanaka sat at his station, his fingers dancing across the holographic controls as he navigated the Exodus through the vast expanse of the galaxy. He had been a pilot for most of his life, and space travel had become second nature to him. But no matter how many times he navigated through these dark corridors of the cosmos, the silence still unnerved him. "How are the coordinates looking?" Helena asked, breaking the silence. "Stable for now," Kai replied, his eyes glued to the star map in front of him. "But we're approaching an asteroid field in the next few hours. It's not massive, but it could pose a problem if the ship's trajectory shifts." Helena's jaw tightened. They couldn't afford to make a mistake. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and the Exodus would be torn apart. "Prepare the shields. Double-check the thrusters." "Already on it," Kai replied, his voice calm. "We'll be fine, Helena. Trust me." But Helena didn't feel fine. She couldn't afford to. The weight of her responsibility pressed down on her with every passing minute. The Exodus was humanity's last hope. They couldn't fail. In the depths of the ship, Dr. Felix Riker was buried in his work, running simulations on the ship's ecosystem. His mind was consumed by the constant need to monitor every minute detail: air filtration systems, water recycling, oxygen levels. There was no room for error, and yet, no matter how many times he checked, the numbers never quite added up. Felix had always been a scientist, someone who found comfort in patterns and equations. But out here, in the depths of space, the chaos of the unknown constantly gnawed at him. "How long can we keep this going?" he muttered to himself, his fingers tapping on the edge of the console in frustration. What if the crops don't grow? What if the food production fails? A soft beep from his terminal broke his reverie. He quickly scanned the screen, his eyes widening. "Not again," he whispered. One of the vital systems, the oxygen recycler, had malfunctioned again. The slightest drop in efficiency could lead to catastrophic consequences. Felix's mind raced as he worked quickly to reroute power, stabilize the readings, and reset the system. But the nagging thought in the back of his mind kept creeping forward. What would happen if they couldn't fix it next time? On the other side of the ship, Ava Sloan worked tirelessly in the hydroponics bays, her hands moving quickly to check the crops. The sterile artificial environment was her domain, and yet it felt increasingly alien to her. The once promising crops had started to show signs of stress, their leaves wilting despite her best efforts. She wiped sweat from her brow and leaned down to inspect the soil, her eyes narrowed in concentration. A faint hum of the irrigation system filled the room, but it wasn't enough to drown out the noise in her head. "This isn't good," she muttered, her fingers running over the delicate stems of a tomato plant. "We need more nutrients. We need more light. The system isn't delivering." Her communicator buzzed, and she reached for it, her voice tight. "Sloan here." "Ava," Felix's voice came through, strained with urgency. "We've got a problem with the oxygen recycler. I need you to check the air filters in the food production bays. Something's off." Ava let out a breath, her mind already shifting into problem-solving mode. "Understood. I'll be there in 10. The pressure of the mission was wearing on her, but she couldn't afford to show it. Not now. Not when everything was riding on their ability to keep the Exodus running. She grabbed her toolkit and headed for the food production area, her mind whirling with the tasks ahead. Hours later, the ship entered the asteroid field. The ship's engines hummed louder as Kai navigated the narrow paths between the floating rocks, the ship's shields flickering on the edges as they absorbed the impacts. The constant, low vibrations made everything feel as if they were teetering on the edge of disaster. "Hold steady, everyone," Helena called over the comms. "We're almost through." The crew's focus was razor sharp. Every member was at their station, their actions synchronized, their minds sharp with the singular goal of surviving the obstacles ahead. Felix was still working on the oxygen recycler, Ava was troubleshooting the air filtration system, and Kai was keeping the Exodus on course through the deadly rock field. The ship rocked suddenly, throwing everyone off balance. The lights flickered and alarms blared throughout the ship. Kai's hands flew over the controls, his voice calm yet strained. "Brace yourselves. We've taken a hit." The asteroid had clipped the ship's outer edge, causing a cascade of minor malfunctions. The lights went out for a moment, and the hum of the engines grew erratic. It was clear. The Exodus was not invincible. Felix's voice crackled over the comms, his tone urgent. "The life support systems are compromised. We've lost power to several sectors. We need to stabilize the ship, or we risk losing everything." Ava's heart pounded as she ran to the nearest control panel, her hands flying over the console. "I'm rerouting power to the main generator. Hold on." Kai gritted his teeth, pushing the ship through the asteroid field with steady hands. "We're almost there. Just a little longer," he muttered to himself. It was a race against time. The Exodus was battered, but they couldn't afford to stop. Not now. Not when they were so close. Finally, the ship cleared the asteroid field, the danger slipping away as the stars ahead seemed to shine a little brighter. The ship was still intact, but just barely. The crew breathed a collective sigh of relief. Helena walked across the bridge, her boots making a soft clicking sound against the floor. She exhaled slowly, her eyes scanning the crew. "That was too close," she said, her voice steady but tinged with the weight of what had just happened. "But we made it. We're alive." And for the moment, that was enough. The Exodus moved through space like a fragile oasis in the desert, a shimmering thread of life amidst the endless void. Inside, however, the tension was palpable. The crew knew their journey was a race against time. Every system, every resource, every ounce of energy had to be perfectly balanced. And in the heart of the ship, the most critical of these systems, the ecosystem, was under siege. Ava Sloan stood in the hydroponics bay, her hands stained with soil as she carefully checked the latest batch of crops. The once pristine rows of plants were starting to show signs of stress. The tomatoes, once plump and vibrant, were now withered and shriveled. The lettuce was turning brown at the edges. The artificial sunlight, which had been meticulously calibrated, flickered in and out. The nutrient levels in the water were dangerously low, and Ava could see the problem growing by the day. She wiped the sweat from her brow, the weight of the task bearing down on her. "Come on," she muttered under her breath. "Please work." But the crops didn't respond. They were dying, slowly but steadily, and with them, the hope that the Exodus could survive long enough to reach a new world. She turned toward the control panel, her fingers moving swiftly across the buttons. She adjusted the lighting system, recalibrated the water flow, and checked the CO2 levels. Nothing seemed to be working. The systems were overwhelmed, and the plants were suffocating in the sterile environment. Ava gritted her teeth. She knew what needed to be done, but it would take time they didn't have. The food production system was on the brink of collapse, and without a viable solution, the Exodus was doomed. She had been running simulations for days, trying to find the right balance, but each attempt seemed to fall short. Meanwhile, across the ship, Dr. Felix Riker was facing his own set of challenges. The life support systems were designed to be self-sustaining, but after the recent asteroid collision, they were beginning to falter. The oxygen recycler had been damaged, and Felix had spent the better part of the day rerouting power and recalibrating sensors to keep everything running smoothly. But it wasn't enough. Felix leaned over the console, tapping the screen with increasing frustration. Come on, he muttered. His fingers flew across the controls, adjusting the oxygen filtration system to compensate for the reduced efficiency. But the numbers weren't adding up. The ship's atmospheric balance was becoming unstable. He pulled up a diagnostic report, his eyes scanning the data for any clue as to what had gone wrong. The readings were chaotic. No way. How could this be? He double-checked the life support systems, and his heart sank. The CO2 scrubbers were running at a fraction of their normal capacity. They were losing oxygen faster than it could be replenished. He had to act, and fast. If the ship's air supply was compromised, the entire crew would be at risk. Felix grabbed his communicator. Sloan, I need you to check the CO2 scrubbers in the food production bays. We're losing too much oxygen, and I can't isolate the problem. I need your help. Ava's voice crackled through the comms, sounding strained. On it, Felix. I'll be there in 5. Felix exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Every system was connected, and every failure meant disaster. He glanced over at the ship's control center, where Helena stood, watching over the crew. She had the burden of the entire mission on her shoulders, and it was becoming increasingly clear that no matter how prepared they were, they could only control so much in this cold, unforgiving expanse of space. Hours later, Ava and Felix stood side by side in the food production bay, staring at the malfunctioning CO2 scrubbers. They were vital to keeping the oxygen levels in check, and yet the equipment was sputtering, its lights flickering dimly. Felix examined the system's diagnostics, his brow furrowing. It's not just a mechanical failure, he said, his voice tight. The scrubbers aren't absorbing carbon dioxide at the rate they should be. Something is blocking the airflow, but I can't find it. Ava knelt beside the machine, pulling open a panel to inspect the inner workings. Her hands were trembling slightly, but she kept her composure. The stakes were higher than ever. If they couldn't get this fixed, the entire crew would be suffocating in a matter of days. She reached for a tool, her eyes scanning the inside of the scrubber. We've got a clog here, she said, her voice steady despite the tension in her chest. Looks like a buildup of some kind of organic material. It's choking the airflow. Felix's eyes widened in realization. Wait, organic material? How could that get in there? Ava didn't have time for questions. She worked quickly, clearing the debris and resetting the system. But as she did, her mind raced. This wasn't just a malfunction. Something was wrong with the ship's systems, something deeper. When she finally finished, the scrubbers hummed to life, but the sense of unease lingered. That should buy us some time, she said, wiping the sweat from her forehead. But we need to figure out what's really going on. The systems shouldn't be failing like this. Felix nodded, but his thoughts were far away. Something was happening to the Exodus, something that no one could explain. And the more they uncovered, the more it seemed like they were fighting an enemy they couldn't see or understand. Later that evening, the crew gathered for the daily briefing. The lights in the meeting room flickered, but Helena didn't let the small technical glitches distract her. The tension was thick in the air as the crew took their seats, their faces marked by the fatigue of endless days spent on edge. Helena stood at the front of the room, her eyes scanning the crew. The last few weeks have been difficult, she began, her voice steady but strained. But we're still here. We've survived the asteroid field, and the food production systems are back online, but we can't afford to get comfortable. We have to remain vigilant. Every system, every person, every decision counts. She looked directly at Felix and Ava. You both have done incredible work keeping us alive, but we're facing more than just mechanical problems. There's something deeper at play, something affecting the systems in ways we don't understand. We need answers. Ava exchanged a glance with Felix, both of them feeling the weight of Helena's words. They couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was wrong with the Exodus, and it wasn't just the systems failing. It was something in the very fabric of their mission, something they were only beginning to unravel. Helena's gaze softened as she looked at her crew. We will find a way to survive, but we must face the truth. The road ahead is treacherous, and we must trust each other now more than ever. The crew nodded in solemn agreement. They had come this far. They had no choice but to keep going. As the days blurred into weeks, the reality of space travel began to weigh heavily on the crew of the Exodus. They had left Earth behind, leaving behind everything they had ever known: family, friends, even the feel of grass beneath their feet or the warmth of the sun on their skin. In exchange, they had gained isolation. The endless expanse of space, a cold, indifferent void that stretched on forever, had become their home. Helena Kaur sat in her private quarters, looking at a hologram of Earth that had been transmitted to her by one of the last remaining communication stations on the planet before they left. It was a reminder of everything they had lost, but it was also a reminder of why they were here. She ran her fingers through her short-cropped hair, staring at the rotating image of her home. It felt like a distant dream now, something that belonged to someone else. She leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. The burden of leadership was heavy. The decisions she had to make, each one more difficult than the last, were taking their toll. The crew had to stay strong, but that strength was wearing thin. The ship was malfunctioning. The crops weren't growing as expected. The oxygen was running low. And worst of all, the isolation was starting to eat away at the minds of her crew. She stood up, shaking off the oppressive weight that had settled over her like a thick fog, and walked toward the control room. The command center of the Exodus was bathed in the soft blue glow of holographic displays, but there was an underlying tension that had settled into the air. Kai Tanaka, who had once been so full of optimism, sat hunched over his console, eyes tired, hands gripping the controls with a tightness that betrayed his nerves. "I never thought I'd miss Earth," Kai muttered under his breath. He looked up briefly, catching Helena's eye. "I thought I was made for this. Space travel, I mean. But out here, it's different. You get used to the silence, and then you realize it's too quiet. It's like the stars are mocking us." Helena could see the strain in his eyes. Kai, the calm and unflappable pilot, was showing signs of fatigue. The weight of responsibility was starting to show on all of them. They were trapped in the vast void of space with no end in sight, and the isolation was beginning to take its toll. "How are the systems holding up?" Helena asked, her voice measured. "Staying together by a thread," Kai answered. "We've got another minor issue with the propulsion systems, nothing serious, but we're burning through fuel faster than we should. Every fix feels like we're just patching over bigger cracks. It's frustrating." Helena felt her shoulders tighten. "We have to keep it together, Kai, for the crew, for the mission." Kai gave a hollow laugh, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I know, but how much longer can we hold on? How long before it all just falls apart?" Elsewhere on the ship, Dr. Felix Riker sat in the laboratory, staring at the screens in front of him. The constant monitoring of the ship's life support systems had become his obsession. He couldn't afford to fail, not when everything was hanging by a thread. But the deeper he dug, the more he realized that their survival wasn't just a matter of science, it was psychological. The crew had been living in isolation for months, cut off from everything they had ever known. No more Earth, no more family. The silence was deafening. The slow loss of connection to everything familiar was driving them to the edge. Felix rubbed his eyes, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle over him. He stood up from his chair, pacing around the lab as he tried to organize his thoughts. He had always believed in logic and science. But now, in the silence of space, He was starting to feel that the psychological strain was becoming a force just as dangerous as the technical failures. He thought back to the brief exchange he'd had with Ava earlier. Her face had been drawn, her hands shaking as she worked on the crops. She hadn't said anything about it, but Felix could see it in her eyes. She was struggling. They all were. He needed to check on her, see if there was something more they could do. Ava Sloan sat in the hydroponics bay, her hands wrapped tightly around a steaming mug of synthetic coffee. The warm liquid felt good against her cold fingers, but it did nothing to ease the deep sense of dread gnawing at her. She looked at the crops, the plants that should have been thriving, and yet here they were, wilting, barely alive, as if the Exodus itself was slowly losing its battle for life. Ava's mind drifted back to Earth, to the days when she had worked with thriving crops in her lab. The challenge then had been preserving the ecosystem of Earth. Now the challenge was keeping a few plants alive in a sterile, enclosed environment where nothing felt natural. There was no soil, no wind, no insects to pollinate, only artificial lights and recycled water. She took a sip from the mug and sighed, rubbing her tired eyes. The endless days, the constant strain of monitoring the crops, and the relentless nagging fear of failure were starting to get to her. She couldn't fail. She couldn't afford to. Yet, in the back of her mind, she knew the truth. If they didn't find a solution, they would starve, and without food, they would all die. Felix entered the room, his footsteps soft but deliberate. He approached her, his face filled with concern. "How are you holding up?" Ava forced a smile. "As well as I can be, given the circumstances." Felix sat down beside her, his voice quieter now. "I know this is hard, Ava. We're all in this together, but we're going to make it. We have to." She met his gaze, and for the first time in a long while, her voice faltered. "I don't know, Felix. I'm not sure we can keep this up. The crops are dying, the oxygen systems are failing, and no matter how hard we try to fix everything, it feels like we're losing more than we're gaining." Felix reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We can't give up. Not now. We've come too far. We'll find a way." Ava's eyes burned with unshed tears, but she swallowed them back. She had to remain strong. She had to believe that they could make it through this, that the future of humanity depended on their success. But deep down, a small voice whispered, "What if it's already too late?" As the days wore on, the Exodus became a microcosm of what they had left behind, an artificial world, struggling to survive in the cold void of space. The systems hummed with life, but the people aboard were beginning to feel the strain. Isolation, exhaustion, and fear were beginning to break them down. Helena watched from her post on the bridge, her gaze distant. The stars ahead seemed to mock her, distant and cold. She had to lead, had to keep pushing forward. But the road ahead was uncertain and the pressure was building. With each passing day, she wondered, how long could they keep it together before the weight of their own survival broke them all? The silence of space was all-encompassing, suffocating even, as the Exodus drifted through the endless void. But inside the ship, the crew's heartbeat quickened with every passing day. The isolation had begun to feel like a living thing, lurking in the shadows of the ship's narrow corridors, crawling into their thoughts. It was impossible to escape. There was no horizon, no change of scenery, only the hum of the ship and the whisper of their own anxieties. Helena stood at the observation deck, staring into the endless expanse. For the first time in weeks, she found herself captivated by the sight before her. A swirling cluster of stars, each one burning with a distant light, promising warmth in an otherwise cold, indifferent universe. The planet they were approaching was still days away, but it was finally within their reach. "Captain, we've got something." Kai's voice broke through the quiet of the bridge, and Helena turned to see him looking at the star map with a focused intensity. "I'm getting a signal. A faint one, but it's coming from the planet we've been heading toward. It's a transmission, maybe a beacon." Her heart skipped a beat. She had known this day would come, the moment they would discover whether their journey had been in vain, or if, just maybe, there was hope on the horizon. She walked over to Kai's station, peering over his shoulder at the screen. "Is it from a ship? A colony?" she asked, her voice laced with both caution and hope. "Too weak to tell," Kai replied, adjusting the signal's frequency. "But it's definitely artificial. Someone or something is out there." Helena's mind raced. Could this be the new home they'd been searching for? Or was it a trap? Start analyzing the signal, she ordered, her tone firm. We're going to need more information before we make any decisions. Set a course. Get us closer. The faint glimmer of possibility grew stronger in Helena's chest as the Exodus adjusted its trajectory, heading toward the distant planet that could be their salvation or their destruction. Hours passed in a tense silence as the ship's systems hummed and beeped, every crew member at their station, their eyes fixed on their respective screens. It felt as though the entire crew was holding their breath, waiting for a sign. The endless expanse of stars had become a cold, silent witness to their journey. But as they drew closer to the planet, the crew's collective hope began to build. Maybe they weren't alone. Maybe the galaxy wasn't as empty as they had feared. Ava stood by the hydroponics bay, her mind a swirl of anxiety and exhaustion. She had worked tirelessly to salvage what was left of the food supply, but the strain was beginning to show. The crops weren't growing at the rate they needed, and the limited resources had started to dwindle faster than expected. But then her communicator buzzed. Felix's voice came through, a note of urgency in his tone. Ava, get to the bridge, now. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed her toolkit and hurried down the narrow corridors, her mind racing with thoughts of failure. Had something happened to the life support systems again? Were they losing oxygen? Or was it something worse, another malfunction they couldn't fix? When she arrived at the bridge, she was met with a sight that both startled and filled her with wonder. On the screen in front of them was the planet, a lush, vibrant world bathed in the soft light of its sun. Oceans stretched across the surface, vast forests and green plains breaking up the endless blue and brown. It was beautiful, almost too beautiful. Kai spoke as he adjusted the image. We've confirmed it. The signal is coming from the surface. It's not a ship. There's no technology advanced enough to send a beacon from space. It's coming from a facility on the planet. Is it a human facility? Helena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Can't say for sure yet, Kai replied, his fingers moving over the console, but there's definitely something there, and I think we're going to find out what. Ava's breath caught in her throat. This is real, right? This is happening? Helena turned to her, her face a mix of determination and hope. It's happening. The crew worked quickly to prepare for landing. They had no way of knowing what awaited them on the surface, but they couldn't afford to wait any longer. The Exodus's descent toward the planet was slow and deliberate. They had no idea what kind of atmosphere they would encounter, nor what the surface conditions would be like. The ship's exterior trembled as it cut through the thick layers of the planet's atmosphere. Once they reached the planet's surface, the crew quickly suited up in their spacesuits. The air was thin, and they needed to test the atmosphere for contaminants before stepping outside. Felix, Ava, and Kai were the first to exit the ship. Helena stood at the entrance of the ship, her eyes scanning the alien terrain before them. The planet was eerily silent, but it felt alive. The air was fresh, and the ground beneath their boots felt solid. They had arrived. The crew stepped carefully, each of them adjusting to the new environment. The planet's gravity was slightly weaker than Earth's, making their movements lighter and more fluid, but their focus was razor sharp. They were not alone here. The signal, the facility, it was waiting for them, and they had to understand it. They walked toward the signal's source, a structure partially buried in the rolling hills. As they neared, they could make out the remnants of what appeared to be an ancient yet functional outpost. It was clear that someone or something had been here for a long time. Felix tapped his communicator. Helena, we've reached the facility. It looks ancient, but intact. We're going inside. Helena's voice crackled through the comms, steady and resolute. Be careful. We don't know what's inside yet. Ava could feel the weight of her own breath as she entered the structure, the cool, dry air feeling foreign against her skin. They passed through a corridor lined with alien markings, strange symbols that she didn't recognize, and into a central chamber. It was a vast space, with towering walls and what looked like dormant machinery spread throughout the room. And then, at the center, they found it, the source of the signal. A giant, crystalline structure pulsed with faint blue light, sitting on a pedestal in the middle of the room. The air around it hummed, the resonance vibrating in their chests. It was beautiful and terrifying. Kai approached the crystal carefully, his hand reaching out toward it. "This is it," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "This is the beacon, but it's not from any human civilization I've ever seen." Felix moved toward the crystal, examining it closely. "We need to understand what it is. It could be the key to everything." Helena stepped forward, her eyes locked on the crystal. "This is the moment we've been waiting for. Let's make sure we're ready for whatever it is." As the crew gathered around the crystal, they felt a sense of awe and unease settle over them. This was it. This was their chance. But as they stood before the unknown, the weight of their journey, their mission, and their future pressed down on them. The question loomed, would this new world provide the salvation they so desperately sought, or would it be another chapter in the story of their extinction? The Exodus hovered just above the surface of the alien world, its engines thrumming softly, a constant reminder that they were no longer voyaging through the void. The air outside was still, eerily quiet. Only the distant sounds of their own breathing punctuated the stillness. Yet, within, there was a buzz of excitement. The crew had finally set foot on an unknown world, a world that might hold the future of humanity, or its end. Helena Kaur stood at the foot of the ramp, her eyes scanning the horizon. The landscape before her was striking, unlike anything she had ever seen. The sky was a pale greenish hue, not the deep blue of Earth, but something softer, otherworldly. The land stretched before them, vast, open plains dotted with tall, swaying grasses that shimmered in the gentle breeze. In the distance, towering mountains rose sharply from the ground, their peaks lost in the mist. The whole world felt alive, breathing in tandem with the crew's awestruck hearts. "Can you believe it?" Kai said, his voice quiet as he stood beside her. His hand gripped the side of the ship, and he looked out at the expanse. "This place, it's almost too perfect." Helena didn't answer immediately. She simply watched, feeling the weight of the moment. "It's too perfect," she said finally, her voice heavy with caution. "That's what worries me." Despite the breathtaking beauty of the planet, Helena knew all too well that perfection was often a mask. The Exodus had been through too many challenges, and their survival was far from guaranteed. They couldn't afford to be blinded by wonder. Every step had to be taken with caution. Inside the facility, the crystal at the center of the room pulsed with an eerie blue light, as though it had a life of its own. The air around it hummed with an energy that was both foreign and familiar. Felix leaned in closer, his fingers tracing the strange alien symbols etched into the walls surrounding the crystal. "This is astonishing," Felix muttered, his voice filled with awe. "It's unlike anything we've seen before. This technology, this energy, it's advanced beyond our understanding, but it's not human. It's not even from our galaxy, I'd wager." Ava, who had been quietly examining the surrounding area, turned back to them. "But why is it here?" she asked, her voice edged with uncertainty. "If this place was built by an alien civilization, why leave this behind? What was their purpose?" Felix shook his head. "I don't know, but I'm sure of one thing. This crystal, whatever it is, holds the key to understanding what happened here and perhaps how we can survive." Helena stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the crystal. "We're not just here for knowledge. We're here to find a future. If this civilization left us something that could save us, it's here." As they ventured deeper into the facility, the crew began to notice more unsettling details. The walls, once grand and imposing, were now crumbling with age. It was clear this place had been abandoned for centuries, perhaps millennia. Yet the advanced technology still pulsed with life, a silent testament to the ingenuity of the beings that once inhabited this world. The corridors twisted, leading them further into the heart of the facility. The air grew colder, and the oppressive silence felt heavier with every step. Felix stopped suddenly, his hand hovering over an ancient console embedded in the wall. "This is it," he said, a spark of excitement in his voice. "This console might be able to provide answers. Let me see if I can access it." He quickly worked his way through the controls, his fingers dancing across the interface. The symbols shifted, rearranged, and finally the screen flickered to life. But what appeared on the display wasn't a map or a log. It was a recording, a video, flickering with static. The crew gathered around, watching as the image began to sharpen. Slowly, a figure appeared on the screen, a humanoid being, tall and slender, with glowing eyes and skin that shimmered with an iridescent sheen. Its features were alien, and yet there was a sense of familiarity in the way it moved, the way it spoke. To those who find this message, the figure's voice echoed through the room, its tone calm and measured. We, the Caliph, leave this world behind. Our time is ending. The energy we harnessed has begun to consume us, and the life we created, our greatest mistake, has turned against us. You, the survivors, are our last hope. The crystal you have found holds the power to regenerate a dying world, but it is not without its cost. The image flickered again, but the message was clear. The Caliph had created something so powerful that it eventually turned against them. But there was hope, and it rested in the very thing they had discovered. Felix's voice broke the silence, his words full of disbelief. It's not just energy, he said. The crystal is alive. This power, it's not just technology. It's organic, like a living entity. Helena's heart raced as she processed the information. They knew they were doomed. They created something they couldn't control. And now it's our turn to decide. Will we use this power to save ourselves, or will we become the next to fall? As they ventured further into the facility, they discovered more evidence of the Caliph's downfall. Rooms filled with remnants of technology, data consoles overloaded with information, walls covered in warnings. Warnings about the crystal, about the consequences of tampering with the force it wielded. Ava's thoughts raced. If they failed, what makes us think we'll succeed? How can we control this power without destroying ourselves? Felix looked thoughtful, but his voice was steady. I don't know, but we have no other choice. The Exodus is running out of time. Our resources are finite. The planet we came from is dying. This, whatever this is, might be our only chance to rebuild. Kai stood at the back of the room, gazing out a window at the planet below, its beauty and potential shimmering just beyond the glass. Maybe it's not just about surviving, he said quietly. Maybe it's about building something new, a future, a world where we don't repeat the same mistakes. Helena turned to face them, her voice steady. Then we will take what we've learned and make it work. For humanity. For all of us. But as the crew prepared to take the next steps, they knew they were no longer alone. The Caliph had warned them, but the reality was even more terrifying. Something had gone terribly wrong with their civilization, and the consequences of their mistakes could still be felt. The crew was about to face a choice that would determine whether humanity could rise again, or whether the Exodus would be another forgotten tomb drifting in the stars. The unknown dangers of this alien world were beginning to reveal themselves. The real test had only just begun. The Exodus sat like a lone sentinel on the surface of the alien planet, its massive hull towering over the strange landscape that stretched beyond the ship. The sun, pale and distant, cast long shadows across the terrain, its light gently illuminating the rolling plains and jagged mountains in the distance. Everything seemed peaceful, almost serene, but the weight of the moment was not lost on the crew. They had come here in search of salvation, but they were beginning to understand that survival was only the beginning. Helena Kor stood at the front of the Exodus, gazing out across the land. The planet was beautiful, untouched, and full of potential. But it was also full of danger. They had discovered the Caliph's legacy, but now they had to decide how to move forward. They could not ignore the warning that had come with the crystal, the promise of regeneration mingled with the threat of catastrophe. Beside her, Felix, Ava, and Kai stood in silence. There was no more talking about the mission. It was now about survival. The weight of their choices, their future, pressed down on each of them. They weren't just scientists, engineers, and pilots anymore. They were the first humans to set foot on this new world, and everything they did from here on out would shape the future of humanity. Ava, who had spent days wrestling with the failure of their food systems, felt an uneasy sense of relief as she looked out over the alien fields. She had known that Earth's resources were limited, but now there was a chance to start again, to build something better, something sustainable. But the question remained, could they avoid the mistakes the Caliph had made? I've been thinking, Ava said, her voice breaking the silence. What if we use the crystal, but not for power? What if its true purpose is to help us understand how to live in harmony with this planet, not just take from it? Felix, who had been listening intently, nodded. The Caliph were destroyed by their own hubris. They sought to dominate nature, to harness its power for their own gain. But the crystal, it's not just a weapon or an energy source. It's a living thing. Maybe it can teach us something about balance. Helena turned to face them, her expression resolute. We can't afford to make the same mistakes. We have the knowledge of the Caliph, but we can't let it consume us. We're here to create, not to conquer. Kai stepped forward, a glint of optimism in his eyes. Maybe that's the reason we found this place. To do it right. To prove that humanity can rebuild, not just survive, but thrive without repeating the sins of the past. The crew stood together, their gaze fixed on the horizon. They knew the road ahead would not be easy. They were pioneers on an uncharted world, facing challenges that no one could predict. But in that moment, they also realized that they had a rare gift. The opportunity to build a new world, one that could be better than the one they had left behind. As they began to explore the planet further, the Exodus crew discovered more about the Caliph's civilization. The ruins were not just a testament to the past, but a map, a guide to understanding how to live in harmony with the environment. The technology they left behind was not only advanced, but in many ways integrated with the very fabric of the planet. The Caliph had built their cities with the land, using organic materials that grew with the planet, not against it. Their buildings were not structures, but living, breathing entities, grown and nurtured from the planet's core. Felix, Ava, and Kai spent weeks studying the ruins, piecing together the mystery of the Caliph's downfall. The more they learned, the clearer it became. The Caliph had tried to push nature beyond its limits, bending it to their will. They had sought immortality through the crystal, using its power to transform their world, but instead they had destroyed it. It was a tragic lesson, one that humanity could not afford to ignore. Ava, with Felix's help, began to apply what they had learned. She started working on ways to integrate the principles of the Caliph's farming techniques into the Exodus's systems. They would no longer rely solely on artificial light and synthetic nutrients. They would grow their food in harmony with the planet, using its natural cycles to guide them. It wasn't easy, but they were beginning to see results. The crops began to grow, slowly but surely, as they adapted to the alien soil. Meanwhile, Kai continued his work, exploring the landscape beyond the ship. He discovered vast caverns filled with minerals, rivers that wound their way through the planet's surface, and strange creatures that had adapted to life in this alien environment. Some were harmless, others more dangerous, but they all served as a reminder that this world was alive, vibrant, and unpredictable. It was a world that would require them to tread carefully, to respect its boundaries. Weeks turned into months, and the crew began to settle into a rhythm. The Exodus no longer felt like a lifeless vessel drifting through space. It had become a part of the planet, integrated into its ecosystem. The crew had formed a bond with their new home, and their work had begun to bear fruit, both literally and figuratively. The crystal remained at the heart of their settlement, a symbol of both their survival and their responsibility. They had unlocked its secrets, but they had also learned to treat it with reverence. The power it held was not theirs to dominate. It was a gift, one that required balance, care, and respect. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the planet in hues of purple and gold, Helena stood once again on the observation deck of the Exodus. She gazed out at the world before her, a world that, despite its alien beauty, had become their home. In that moment, Helena knew they had made the right choice. They had not come to conquer this world, but to live with it. The Caliph had fallen because they had forgotten that lesson. But humanity would rise, not as conquerors, but as stewards of a new world. To the future, Helena whispered, a small smile crossing her face as she looked at the stars overhead. To our new beginning. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey through Exodus: A New Beginning. We hope you enjoyed the adventure and the twists along the way. If you're as excited about the future of humanity's survival as we are, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Your support helps our channel grow, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on the story. Will humanity rise or fall? Let us know what you think, and don't miss out on more sci-fi adventures coming your way. Together, we'll continue to explore the unknown. See you in the next chapter. Until then, keep your curiosity alive.